Hello, everyone. Thanks again for joining us at the 2024 MIT Sloan Sports Analytics Conference. My name is Ryan Perkins. I'm a second-year MBA at MIT Sloan. And it is my great pleasure to introduce our next panel, Fanalytics, Fan Engagement in a Virtual and Global World. And engaging in this amazing discussion today, we have our four incredible panelists, Catherine Frederick, Chief Marketing Officer for the Los Angeles Rams, Carolyn Tisch-Blaget, CEO and founder of Next3 and governor and lead owner of New York, New Jersey Gotham FC, Tim Clark, Senior Vice President and Chief Design Officer at NASCAR, and Shelly Passara, Executive Vice President of Global Insights and Innovation at Wasserman. And the panel will be moderated by Allison Overholt, former editor and chief at ESPN Magazine and ESPNW, and currently a professor at Columbia Graduate School of Journalism and founder of Good People, LLC. The panel will run for 45 minutes and we'll leave 10 minutes at the end for questions. For the questions, please submit those via our Cadence app. You can navigate to this panel via the schedule and navigate to the Fanalytics, Fan Engagement in a Virtual and Global World event. Questions can be submitted on there and they will be selected by the moderator. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Allison.
Thanks so much, Ryan. So welcome everyone to Fanalytics. We are here this afternoon to talk about engaging fans in a world where there is a lot of competition for attention. And I'm excited today to dive in with Kat, Carolyn, Tim, and Shelly on how analytics and technology can be a differentiator in a sports properties engagement strategy. Okay, so fan engagement. We almost have to kick things off by talking about the past year's most visible example of a league and sports property driving new fan segments and higher engagement levels. And of course, I'm talking about the NFL and Taylor Swift.
Of course.
Measurable growth in viewership, higher engagement in women, brand new engagement by younger girls. I could go on, but my question is this, and I'm going to ask Kat to kick us off, but everybody to weigh in. If you are running business operations at the Chiefs, what is your data and engagement strategy to make sure those kinds of gains are sticky and that they're not just a one-time blip?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, you absolutely welcome. This is great for the game. The incremental audiences generated, at that point, it is on us as a team, as a franchise, to capitalize. How do you demonstrate what your values are, what the brand is about, based on what you know about them? And it is about bringing those incremental audiences in, but trying as best you can to understand who they are, what they care about, and make sure that you have benefits and value to deliver. And I think that it is an incredible momentum, as I said. I can't wait until like our guys start dating Olivia Rodrigo or Dua Lipa or any of that, because in a town like LA, yeah, that's where culture is truly defined.
Yeah, I second that. Just learn everything you possibly can about them. Figure out who's new, how long they've been there, maybe why they haven't been there before.
Right.
Right, and that's the big assumption is that Swifties just didn't want to be there no matter what. And I don't think that's true at all. We haven't done any work on that specifically, but figure out why, like you said, your brand potentially then means to them, and what else they're doing and where else you can show up. And if you don't have an asset or a way to engage with them, you better think quickly about how to build one.
For sure.
So that you can hold them in, because it then becomes, and we all know it's moving towards like a player-driven connection point, but that then leads to engagement with other teams, because that would be the natural thing that they're looking for in other teams, could be this player first. Getting to fans, Jess talked about this on another panel this morning, where we're finding fans of multiple teams in one sport or in one league because it's that player first mentality. I like Cooper on one team and I like Jason on the other. So figure that out and then build the plan around them. So invest in data, which of course we would say, but learn as much as you can and then build whatever you can to hang on to them.
Yep. Other thoughts?
But there's no truth to the rumor that we have just parked a running race car for every race as an open invitation for Taylor Swift. So if that happens, then so be it.
I love it. So staying with the topic of growing fan bases and deepening loyalty, we're now 4 years removed from the start of the pandemic. Fun fact, the last time I moderated this panel was in 2020. like 5 days before the world shut down, and we had no idea. The conversation we were having 4 years ago was very different topics. But what trends or shifts in fan engagement have you measured in the wake of the pandemic? I'm curious about what things you've seen that have fundamentally shifted, or whether things have really kind of returned to their pre-pandemic levels of engagement.
I'm happy to start. I think, you know, in 2020, when everything shut down, including live sports, we made a fairly immediate pivot. I think we were dark for 1 week, and the following weekend, we pivoted into virtual racing with all of our athletes, all of our drivers, but it was happening in a virtual environment. And I think we took a couple of lessons from that, one of which was we probably had a tendency, and maybe still to a certain extent do, to overthink things. And I think there's value in data, there's value in the insights and the analytics, but there's also some value in just moving quickly when you feel like you've got a good idea. So I think there's been some extenuation to that in the days since. But I think we probably all, to a certain extent, found some very much pent-up demand for moving back from virtual into real-life fan experiences. And if there was ways to gather data on those fans or those fan behaviors during the pandemic when consumer and fan behaviors was very different, then it's up to us to make that pivot when they do come back to the real world in-person experiences to offer just as good, if not better, experiences.
Yeah. Are you all seeing levels of fan engagement back to their pre-pandemic levels, or are we in a fundamentally different place now?
I wouldn't say that we're in a fundamentally different place, but I do think that the pandemic tested a lot of people's digital capabilities and showed you where the gaps were, showed you the increasing need to be able to rely on your data. You got to know them to grow them, and for that to happen, I think you had to increase your sophistication, your technology investments, et cetera. And so I do actually think, never let a good crisis go to waste. This accelerated a lot of things that we needed to do, having opened a new building in 2020 and having a whole season where we were still fortunate to have games, but no fans in the building. And so what did we learn that year? How do we continue to experiment around a lot of the hypotheses of how to engage in that environment when everybody was trying to explore through it? And now I think you forged some of those best practices, and they're accelerating the scale at what you can do now.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Carolyn.
Oh, just to build on that, I think for so long, the kind of legacy leagues like the NFL took for granted that you were always going to have a filled stadium, and you were always going to have a waiting list, and you almost didn't need to have a ticketing team, right? Because, like, of course people are going to show up. And I think COVID did test that, and all of a sudden you can still, you can love the New York Giants, the Los Angeles Rams as much as you've ever loved them, but wow, is it really enjoyable to watch that game in your living room with your own snacks, your own drinks, your own bathroom we were just talking about. So, I think it just raised the bar on what all of us need to create a really great in-person experience if the expectation is that people are going to show up for it.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I think the other thing we learned is, like, what else everybody cared about.
Right.
Right, because we had to quickly go and say, okay, so if they're not doing this, then what else are they doing? To your point, Kat, like pressing on digital capabilities, 100%. And then if you weren't there before, how do I create an authentic experience digitally when I've only relied on live, or I've only relied on a particular combination of digital and live? I think the other thing too is we found, like, latent value when they came back, or sports came back, just even in their miniature constructs, so the wubble with the W, right? So thinking about that, and actually how hard fans of women's sports were already working to see them, to participate, to engage, then you layer in everything that was happening socially around that, and now we realize, wow, these fans have exponential value that has carried forward, right? Because now women's sports has gone out, the W specifically has gone out, excuse me, and they have now figured out that, okay, my fans care about these same issues. So with that in mind, what can brands do to either come in and support that? And that was a new conversation. That conversation was not on the top of the list if we were meeting with our partners on either side. Right. whether it was with a rights holder or with a brand. So that pulled that forward and frankly put more value in the system when you're looking at now talking about your audience coming out of it, saying those that stayed, those habits that remain, they are now worth a lot more to us because A, they went through the work to get there, and we also have them in on something they're passionate about that's separate from the sport itself. It's tying into their values. It's incredibly authentic.
And to build on that, I think it has become so critically important that the investment, which is oftentimes, not here, but oftentimes for businesses, not sexy to be like, we need to invest in this infrastructure. We need to get it right because that will provide us that future agility. And I think that became more paramount, especially coming out of the pandemic where there was so much data and lensing of those individual fans. How do you harness that? How do you activate against it? And how do you ensure that you're tracking so that you are making a difference to what they're telling you coming out of the pandemic?
What are some of those new things that you are tracking, and what are some of those different investments that your organizations are making as a result? Who wants to dive in on that? Carolyn, you want to start?
Sure. So my background's on the marketing side and now shifting into sports. So I used to run marketing at Peloton, and we thought we really were laser focused on NPS. So Net Promoter Score, how likely are you, there's probably a lot of really complicated data happening at MIT. This is very simple. How likely are you to refer a friend for this product? And that was really the holy grail. And when we kind of broke that down into, again, very simple, your usage of the product. If you use our product, thinking about Peloton, but you can translate that to sports, you use your product, you are not going to churn. You are going to stay forever. And then the lifetime value is, however you want to calculate that. So so now kind of bringing that in, we're taking the same we're taking the same lens and applying that into sports now. So we just invested in a women's soccer team, New York, New Jersey, Gotham FC, and we're taking that same kind of, again, simple laser approach to say, what is the NPS of a fan? When people walk into our stadium and they go to, what's the game day NPS look like? How often, when, maybe we can get people there because maybe you'll hear today and you're like, I didn't know that New York had a women's soccer team, I'll go. But you're going to go to a game, and then how likely are you going to refer your friend? How likely are you going to come back? And that's kind of, there's a lot of things we can track below that, but that's really the holy grail that we look at.
Yeah, and what is that journey? How are you going to refer them? Is it about going to the match right away, or is there another way that you're going to engage to begin with? Is it player first? Is it not? I don't know. But I would say those are the things we started looking at as well. I mean, because we're working with so many different brands who have very different needs from their consumers, very different objectives, we kind of had to look at everything. And what that drove was for us to go back and say, okay, if we're pulling in data from all over the place, how do we bring it together so it makes sense? And then we can turn it back out. Because our power really lies in helping people know what to do with it, right? Versus just having it. Great, you and I just had this conversation backstage. I might be sitting on boxes and boxes of it, but if I don't know what it means to the next best decision, what am I doing with it, right? So that was where our power came in, and knowing what they're going to do. What does that referral look like? And I think then where else in the ecosystem or kind of in like the spectrum of engagement is there value to be had? So if you have those who are your top net promoters, I would imagine they're worth a tremendous amount to you. But now that we have all of these new ways of communicating with them because of new behaviors that came out of the pandemic, what are the inflection points along the way that I can nudge someone along so that you end up with more folks there, even if some drop out that are of lower value? So we had to go back and kind of reskin that for everyone, right? And it's almost like reset. But the investment and the time was really spent on bringing the data together so that we could understand it and then spin it back to our clients.
And is that deepened understanding leading you to keep track of new and different touch points and pay attention to other things? What are some of those things that you pay attention to now that you weren't as focused on before?
I mean, I'll say it quick and then you guys talk about it because you're doing it day in and day out. But I mean, with respect to that, everything else that they're doing, right? I was on the brand side for 20 years before I jumped the fence and came over to the agency side, but we cared about everything that was happening in a household when I was at PepsiCo. It was like, how long am I gonna keep Cheetos in that house versus when they switched to Sun Chips and when they switched to I think it's called Starry, but at the time it was Sierra Mist. But you know, from that standpoint, right? Right.
My
Where did
first
it go?
job out of business school, Sierra Mist.
Yeah.
Where did that go?
Yeah.
No, we're good.
I'm not sure, but
No, we're
anyway,
good. I don't think so.
from that standpoint, but there was a very distinct transition in these behaviors, what was happening in someone's life to kind of predict how big of a share we would have of the household. It's very similar. Like once we know that fans are now looking at many more passion points because they had to kind of pick some new lanes and things to be interested in, right? You had emptied out the Netflix library, so now you have to figure out what am I going to do next. Then you're looking at how do I bring that passion point in or make it adjacent to what I'm already doing, because then I can extract more value from that fan, or just talk to them another time and further advance my brand values to them. So those are the things that we were looking at. I'm sure you all have plenty of specific experience.
I think you're right. I think the extension to that is doing it in maybe a non-selfish way. Because back to your previous question, Allison, I think as opposed to saying, is this fan engagement more valuable in the arena versus happening digitally or virtually, I think the way that we've maybe changed our way of thinking, certainly post-pandemic, is fandom is fandom, whether that's happening in an arena that may or may not get scale. I don't think that makes those fans any less valuable. I would even argue maybe it makes them more valuable, because I think as we're all looking to get younger and more diverse, I think opening up virtual channels or second screens or whatever the case may be, if the end goal is ultimately to get them into the venue, fine, but I don't think we can discount those fans that have different or newer ways or more immersive ways to engage with the sport. So I just don't think it can be exclusionary, and it can't be on our terms. It has to be on theirs.
Exactly. I mean, I think you think of your fans and that great white whale of one-to-one personalization where everyone is driving and they're pulling the experience they want to have from your brand, but you're giving them all the options and opportunities. What we've seen huge growth rates in SMS, and to me, that is a huge trust factor, right? Like I can infer that if I'm able to get into your text messages, that's very different than me being able to get into your email, right? And so you start to think about, it's always, and it's the classic marketing example of right channel, right message, right fan, right time, but the complexity of that has certainly exploded. We lean on things like our algorithms, machine learning, and AI to help make sense of this whole world of data that you're sitting on. But at the end of the day, it's how do you create an emotional connection with those fans? At the Rams, I believe if I do my job right, only 1% of our total fandom will actually enter the building, right? Attend a game. Because I've got global audiences, and I've got folks at which maybe price or for other reasons they can't make it to the building. That doesn't mean that their fandom is any less, to Tim's point. And how do I super serve them? How do I super serve someone in Shanghai? How do I super serve someone in Melbourne or Mexico City? And I think that comes down to, in order to serve these audiences, in order to serve 72 distinct neighborhoods across Los Angeles, you have to let the data show you what matters as it sits up against your agenda of what value you have to deliver.
Just one point on that I just want to add is I totally agree with everything you're saying. That is such a shift for legacy organizations to think like that. When you think of, again, like traditional NFL franchises, the idea that you would care about a fan in a country that is never going to walk into your stadium is a fundamental shift from where they've been in the past.
And I think that's how you decide you want to discuss your fan base. Is it the people who come to games? There's so many people who, for all the reasons, are going to root those fans on, including our St. Louis fans, including our fans from way back when we were in Orange County, Anaheim. And so I do think that it is really, really important to think broadly about that value and let your fans speak to what they want from your experience, and make sure that you do have offerings for all of your key growth audiences.
You know what I think is really fascinating? So as you're saying that, right, such a huge shift and change, but as your example, someone, you know, on the other side of the world. So go back to your opening in the Taylor Swift effect. I mean,
how are you going to serve those fans?
How many people were just, right, how are you serving those fans all over the world? So now you have to worry about what your brand means to all of these people who now have been introduced to the NFL around the world, right, through her. And through this one particular team, but now the league has a bigger story that they have to tell. And yes, the international program's gone a long ways, but that's fascinating and not something that everyone's been thinking about top of their list.
And
even.
With the evolution of sports fandom,
yeah,
the paradigm has shifted, and so it is completely natural that the industry has to shift. Yeah. With, you know, first with fantasy and now with sports betting, what you're passionate about, where that irrational sports passion stems from, could be a ton of different motivations. It's the grandfather who wants to take his grandson to a game, or it's a, hey, I really, really need Aaron Donald to make this sack because, you know, or it's Travis Kelce catching a touchdown in the Super Bowl. Like, there's different motivations as to why people are passionate about sports. And I do think as marketers, it behooves us to understand the why.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Shelley, I wanted to come back for a second to something you mentioned. You started at PepsiCo, you made the shift over to the agency side. Since you've joined Wasserman, you've brought data analytics to the forefront in your time there. And some would say revolutionized how your company looks at their audience and its marketing possibilities. How did you, and Carolyn mentioned this too, that this is a fundamental shift for existing organizations to change how they think about decision making. How did you introduce that thinking?
So lucky for me, I honestly didn't have to, because it was already in our DNA, right? So when I got there, Elizabeth Lindsay, who's the president of Brands and Properties Division, I mean, she was probably the first staunch advocate, with Casey, you know, honestly backing her up, and was part of the reason I did jump the fence. Was they said, hey, we want to create a language where brands and properties can come together in a way we're after the same thing, we want to give fans an amazing experience together. But we need a language that connects them together and shows that there's value on both sides. Okay, that sounds amazing. Love selling chips and soda, but much rather create these experiences. So it wasn't a hard sell. What became hard, and you just said this before, and I thought, God, this is encapsulating it, is the non-sexy stuff. The hard sell is going in and saying, I need this much money for access to this data, this group of insanely brilliant people who are going to help us mine that data and turn it into something that's then going to help our clients. But guess what? You might not see that for a hot minute, right? But I need the money up front. And so that took time, getting people to understand that actually being a fast-paced, dynamic, somewhat impatient organization, this was something where we needed to slow down and believe that we have honestly built a massive business on being insights-led and data first, but now we had to put our money where our mouth was, in the infrastructure. So instead of buying all the subscriptions now, it's like, okay, we'll take what we can from the market, but if first party is the way to go, you guys all know it, then we have to take that into our own control, and frankly, that's proprietary. It can be proprietary for us, but it can be a huge benefit to our clients. So getting us to take that on, because we're not developers, we're not a tech company, we're not an IT company, but we needed to bring that expertise in so that we could build that out and then, you know, put that benefit into the market for our clients and give fans these amazing experiences. That shift took years, right? So with that in mind, we did little pieces at a time, but you're building and flying, and you need a lot of people behind you, and there are gonna be missteps, like being able to fail fast and move on, make decisions and fail fast. So it was a bit of a cultural shift, but eventually you get 1, 2, 3, you sell a few more things, and suddenly, you know, you're kind of not alone in it. You've got a whole army with you. Right, that's right. So that was the harder part then. The belief was already there. It was a matter of like, can we take the time and make the investment, and thank God we did.
Makes sense. So Carolyn, you're not pivoting an organization, you're building one. what do you look for as you look to create a team that's going to make data-driven decisions and take this more forward-looking approach to things? What kinds of qualities and characteristics are you looking for, and how do you build that kind of team?
Yeah, so when I think about, as I said before, so we just invested in this women's soccer team, and as we think about this opportunity of, there really isn't a legacy of sports in women's sport. A legacy of data in women's sports. So we do have an opportunity to kind of build what we want from the ground up. And it's clear, obviously, there's no shortage of data, so it's really about finding people that know what to do with it. And I would say the kind of common trait we're looking for is a lot of what we've talked about, which is this deep understanding and passion for the fan and for the consumer. And kind of, I just go back to kind of basic marketing principles of who is your consumer, what are you solving for them? What is the need you're filling for them? And not just, you're not just creating a product for product's sake, but you're fulfilling a need for them. And really, if you can't answer that question, to your point, for every one of your consumers, then you're not really doing your job. And so there's going to continue to be different technology, a year or two from where we are today. And people call me all the time and they're like, what performance management tool did you use at Peloton? I'm like, first of all, I don't remember. Second of all, it would have nothing to do with what you would need today because the tool is going to change. And so I don't really care as much about like the specific technical skills that someone's going to bring today because those are going to change. But really what's harder to teach is that deep passion for who is my consumer and what need am I filling for them. And that's really what I'm looking for.
Yep. Other thoughts on building teams? I'm sure all of you think about this constantly.
I mean, I think it is so much of growing fandom is the art and the science, right? The collaboration, to Carolyn's point, the psychology of what makes fandom tick, how does fandom graduate over time, those kinds of things, but also not letting yourself go to a theoretical academic place with that, and making sure that the data gives you pragmatism. What are you going to do about it? How are you going to make their lives better? How are you going to improve the experience? And I think the goal is to challenge yourself every day, as opposed to making these exercises that the business goes through, so that it is built into the DNA and part of that shared vocabulary of what success looks like for the business. Because growth, sometimes you can say, does it make you feel good? It's better when you can quantify it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so speaking of challenges, and follow up with you on that, your stadium's been operating for a couple of years now, and you share your stadium and your town with another NFL team. So how does that impact your fan engagement strategy? How do you use data to differentiate the Rams brand?
I mean, it's, first of all, for those of you who have not been to an event at SoFi Stadium, you have to come. It is the epicenter of sports and entertainment. Taylor did 6 nights. And you can watch it, you can get a glimpse of that if you watch her capture of her tour, the Eras Tour. So definitely come by, call me when you come over. But ultimately, I think it comes down to, I wish that was the only competition in town. Mm-hmm. But with double-digit competition, not only just in sports, but you think about the world of music, you think about the beaches free, you think about the mountains being so close. You have to have a compelling value proposition. You have to be a brand that people want to root for. And remember, you are in the city of champions. So this is not a, hey, we were good once, like, you're still our fans. No, you have to stay committed to those winning values, whether you're winning or not. And I think that ultimately comes down to how we present that value, and how it's not about benchmarking to one another. It is living our best values the best way we can in LA, in California, and across the globe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to build on that.
I was going to say, would you please, because you're in a crowded media market too.
Yes, I feel like we
share a lot of it.
So New York has 15 professional sports teams, but to your point, the sports teams are the least of the competition, right? There's Broadway, there's music, there's good restaurants. So we, every day, have to put the best product on the field. whether that's Gotham, whether that's the New York Giants, and give people a reason to show up. And so we spend much more time, again, thinking, as I said before, about who is our target audience, what need are we filling for them, and how do we deliver the best product every day, versus thinking about, in my NFL world, are we thinking about the Giants or the Jets? In Gotham, it's funny, actually, when we invested with Gotham, it was right around when the New York Liberty, the WNBA team was making a playoff run, and so many people would say to us, like, ugh, like, are you guys, how is that affecting Gotham? Liberty's in the playoffs. And I was like, there's not this like finite pie of women's sports fans and like they took them so we can't. Like, this is about putting the best product on the field every day, and people will show up when you do that.
And fandom begets fandom. Like, I think the more that you live your life with that passion and excitement and zeal, you're going to attack all of your passion areas that way. And I think that it is really, really important as we think about that it's not just the physical, right? The war for attention on all media properties is a war that you're fighting. It's the arms race every day. And so how do you think about those motivations and say, it is really important to me as a brand for you to get to know our rookies. I want Kobe Turner singing Tennessee Whiskey. I want him singing the anthem at a Kings game, because this is how people better understand the next class of our brand on the field. And I think that also is mirrored in what is your commitment off the field? And whether physical or digital, I think people expect, particularly with these younger generations that are so social conscious and want to be mission oriented. How are you demonstrating all aspects of your brand through your channels in a way that they can self-select?
Well, so building on that idea of a more expansive notion of fandom, Tim, I wanted to spend a minute hearing from you about the NASCAR Full Speed series on Netflix. It's an exciting accomplishment for you and your team. It feels like an audience expansion move. Can you tell us more about how that project came about, what you hope to accomplish with it?
Sure. I think the idea of storytelling in sports and certainly through the follow doc concept is not a novel concept, but I think it got a big shot in the arm over the last 4 or 5 years with Drive to Survive. So I've lost all of my insecurities of being asked, have you guys ever thought about doing a NASCAR Drive to Survive? So now we can check that box. And I would say that it is as advertised, right? It's not none of us have the luxury of being in one place or the other now. We've got to be ubiquitous, and we certainly have to be ubiquitous with storytelling. And Kat made the point earlier, fandom is not rational. That is off the sheet right now. But you have to give them a reason to care. And I think storytelling, I think is core to that. And I think among other,
my language here.
I mean,
It's so true.
Among other reasons for that show, there are some difficulties with our sport in terms of showcasing these athletes. They are in protective equipment, and then they're in a race car, and they're also going almost 200 miles an hour. It's hard to kind of capture who these people are as human beings, but being able to tell those stories and give people a reason to care about who these people are, who their families are, what their backgrounds are, it's exceptional what they do on Sundays. Now I want to know what he does on a Tuesday. Mm-hmm. And I think the idea of creating those stories and then telling them on a very public platform outside of the race broadcast was exactly the initiative that we were after. And, I think so far so good.
That's awesome. Love to hear that. So fandom is more expansive than we've ever known before. Mm-hmm. Fandom is not rational. Fandom is not finite. These are all really interesting things that each of you have said. And as part of that, Shelley and Carolyn, you've both touched on that as it relates to the growth of women's sports. Mm-hmm. So I want to spend a minute there. Shelley, you've spoken a lot recently about the opportunities that lie in the new approaches to media coverage, growing audiences in women's sports, and specifically the Wasserman effort to grow the Collective think tank. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. Well, relative to the coverage of women's sports, Amy Johnson from my team actually presented in the Competitive Advantage this morning that we are now up to 16% of sports coverage. It was 15% about 6 months ago, but now it's up to 16% of sports coverage dedicated to women's sports. I think what's new and different, so that's great. We're not going to be at parity. The businesses aren't at parity now, but it's another box to check in the business case or the commercial case to continue to say women's sports is an amazing business to be in. Not just because it's women's sports, but it's a great business to be in. I think the way that we had to kind of think about approaching the business, and honestly just doing that work, was to go back to everything we're talking about here is, what is the fan doing? Where are they engaging? And so where are we going to look for where coverage is going to happen, right? So is it social? Is it streaming? Is it linear? Is it digital? Is it live? And what's that combination look like? So we had to go kind of throw out the traditional way of the work that had been done before that was right for that time when it kind of hung at that 4% number for a really long time, and build new models to pull in all of the information everywhere that women's sports was showing up. I mentioned earlier, women's sports fans have had to work really hard for a long time to find it, and it's great that there's growth everywhere, but kind of continuing to hone in on when and where and why you can find it will be great. I think the new media rights deal that the NWSL just came with will be wonderful. It's been talked about a lot. A significant increase in that overall value, but we had to change our model and start to look for it in places where that fan base was, which I think is, honestly, in doing that, you have to look at the whole universe. It's given us great insight to all sports in thinking about places to show up. You just mentioned kind of that idea of it's a day in and day out battle to maintain that engagement, and you're not with them live all of the time. So what is happening everywhere that these fans are during that time that you could pick up on, and whether it's singing Tennessee Whiskey or something else, we can now capture that because we built the model that's going to be rooted in sound, in TikTok, in image recognition, in text capture or whatever. We wouldn't have done that before. We would have relied primarily on the traditional methods, which would have been a lot of Nielsen data, no offense to Nielsen, with respect to the linear side of things and call it more traditional methods. But the world's not that way anymore. So we had to kind of catch up and then be ready to be dynamic enough. And I think fungible, Amy, right, is what you said today, is to have a model that helps us stay on top of it. So we're anticipating what's next versus reporting on what happened in the past.
Yep. And Carolyn, as a lead owner of a women's soccer team, beyond the media piece of the attention pie, what are some of the unique opportunities and challenges that you see as you're thinking about how to reach your audience?
Yeah, so as Shelley just said, for so long, women's sports have they've suffered from a lack of attention in the media. They've suffered from, you couldn't find, to your point, you couldn't find them on TV. There was, even if you wanted to watch women's sports and you were a fan of it, you just couldn't find it. So we weren't a part of the cultural conversation. There was no visibility. There was no investments. 99% of investment dollars in sports went to the men's game. And so that's all changing. But I think so again, we have an NWSL media deal now, historic deal, 40 times revenue of what it was before. You do see the 16%, although I would argue that number should be much higher. And you are seeing new owners coming in like ourselves, like many others that are treating this as an investment. And that's that's kind of the biggest shift is when we talk to brands about becoming sponsors and partners of ours, we don't talk about, yes, it's good for your brand because, this younger consumer feels good about, they're social conscious and they really want brands that stand for something that they believe in. We show them that there's an ROI and that there's a real financial investment to be made in women's sports. And that's what's going to make this a sustainable business. That's what's going to make this, 10 years from now, and hopefully we're sitting on panels and we're not saying like, oh wait, in those last 10 minutes, we should remember that there's women's sports too. Yeah. Women's sports will have equal footing because there's a financial argument and a sustainable business behind it.
Yep.
Yeah, we've done work that has proven that the value of engaging a fan of women's sports on average is higher when it comes to brand awareness, sentiment about brands, purchase consideration set, and so we're building that into our valuation models. So now as we're looking out at the value of the assets for whether it's Gotham or Kansas City or Angel City or whomever, we're saying there is incredible value for these brands with these fans of women's sports, and that should be considered on all fronts of the entire commercial proposition so that you're actually seeing that in your revenue. And then the programs are there, the brands will invest, and the fans can have the experience they're looking for.
Yep.
Yeah, we just had a sponsor come in, and actually a previous sponsor come in at a higher number than they were last year. And we, throughout the conversation, they kept saying, we don't have a higher, we don't have more budget. We don't have more budget. Every marketing person has ever said, we don't have more budget. But they were actually able to make the case to pull from other parts of the business. And there was, again, no one's doing that because they're sleeping better at night by doing that. There was a clear decision of this is where we see the best value for our brand, and so we're going to pull a budget from somewhere else and invest it in our relationship with Gotham.
It's awesome.
So we've talked a ton about expansion and engagement strategies. Can we spend a few minutes here before we throw to the audience to talk specifically about technology and tools? For all of you, let's talk about what new analytical tools that your organizations have started using in the last year or so. Like, what is new, what is exciting, what are you paying attention to? Anything that you're like, ooh, I just rely on this more than I used to.
Is it?
Share the knowledge.
Well, big Kager plug. They have been our data Sherpas through our journey as we reimagine the entire technology stack, starting from the data up. And so they have been absolutely instrumental. We certainly are in the cloud worlds with Google and Salesforce and others, but I'm really excited as I look to the future for a lot of what AI can continue to unlock for us, both from an insight perspective, still concerned about the governance around activation, but I do think from an insight perspective can be very, very useful. And so as we think about where we're going and that scale, right? You have to remember sports properties are still very lean, mean teams. So how do you give ourselves leverage from a technology standpoint?
So to that point, I think that's where we found technology to be the most useful. When I, again, go back to my days at Peloton, when we launched internationally, this is not that long ago, 4 or 5 years ago, it was so labor intensive. So when we launched in Germany, it was literally manually translating classes from English to German. Now, when I think about as we look at expanding internationally at the Giants, there are tools that can, in 30 seconds, 10 seconds, translate Daniel Jones doing a press conference, and all of a sudden it's his voice and German. And so when you think about tools like that we don't have a large team, there is no one that's going to sit there at the Giants translating everything into German. I can promise that. So how do we use tools like that to expedite the process? You can really imagine a much more efficient marketing team.
Yeah, I mean, that was what the women's study really, kind of put our feet to the fire in terms of getting really comfortable building and running models of our own, whether it was, natural language processing or, like I mentioned, sound and image recognition, but, using some of the open source capabilities. We were having to go out and grab the whole universe anyway. So let's start to figure out how we can build a model and get to a level of confidence where we know we're looking at the data in a way that the platform has intended it to be looked at. Again, TikTok from a sound perspective. It also allowed us to look at, I think by the time we were done with this second run, 1.6 billion lines of information that we wouldn't have been able to do before. We don't have those people. We don't have all of that.
No one has.
But we've been doing it for years, right? Nobody does. And I think that's the other thing too. It's not like AI didn't just get here. Like we've been using image recognition for years to understand media exposure value, period. So it's just this continuous evolution of it. And frankly, I think all the attention to it is great because we're pointing it at things that we didn't try to solve before. And now we can say, what else could we look at if we could get our arms around this data set, really get it organized, and then analyze it in a way that could help us solve a new problem. So again, kind of back to, all right, you say you can do this, let's go give it a shot and make the team comfortable that we could try some new things along the way.
I'll second the Kager plug. They have been transformational for us. But the other thing I would say is, and maybe this is a little bit more old school and less progressive, but nonetheless effective. So we started a rewards program, which you're going to hear that on the surface and think there's nothing progressive or innovative in 2024 about a rewards program. But what I would say, and Brooks Deaton, who leads that program for us, is here. I think what as we're investing in data and building this consumer data platform that aggregates all of the fan touch points, what becomes of the utmost importance is that not only are you growing the database vertically, but horizontally. And I think the ability to use something like a rewards program, which again doesn't maybe get the headlines that an AI or a machine learning would get, it's nonetheless something that you can use to figure out A, how your core fans are engaging most, and then B, creating more of an incentive to encourage more of that behavior. So I think it's important to not only look at the future, but to make sure that you're using the foundational tools and technology as well.
Well, I actually think it's spectacular. I mean, it's been sitting in front of us the whole time in the entire CPG industry, right? From, they've known what you've been buying in grocery stores forever, right? And I think too, every multi-use entire entertainment district that's being launched and built right now, they all are being announced with rewards programs, connecting everything together. That's what we're trying so hard to do, right? So you're just doing it. And kind of going back to some of those basic, but like you said, Carol, what are you looking for? Someone who's passionate about a brand. What am I looking for to understand how it all ties together and what they're doing in different places? Like the rewards program's amazing.
I think we all spend enough time on airplanes that you start to understand they know an awful lot about me. Why maybe we should just take the same approach.
Yeah,
that's right. That's right.
All right, so we have a ton of questions coming in for all of you, so let's just dive into those. When looking at marketing efforts, how do you strike a balance between the test and learn approach and presenting your customers with a polished product that will be accepted?
I think there are opportunities for you to be scrappy, but still feel like you deliver on your brand promise and your brand standards. But it is about being nimble, and so you can be in that continuous learning mode. But keep in mind, you're still running a business. You have things that you want to share, and you have the times that you want to share them. So I think that for us, it certainly is about being thoughtful about where we can be scrappy and where we want to move fast and break shit, and where we think that we owe the fans a fully baked, polished product. And we run the gamut across the program, incorporating a bit of both on purpose.
Smart. What specifically are you monitoring to measure fandom at a digital level? Is a repost equivalent to a page view, or is opening an email more valuable?
So we started a couple years ago looking at a metric called consumption that is not going to be novel. I feel like I'm really talking the rewards program is bad, our metrics are bad. Trust me, we're way more progressive than I'm making it sound. But we use this metric of consumption, which on our digital platforms was page views and video views by visit. And the idea behind that was, if you're in sports, if we have a race on Sunday that is extremely exciting, like the one in Atlanta this past weekend, we're going to have a lot of traffic. And to a certain extent, that's not a lever that we pulled. That was a byproduct of what happened on the field or on the track. But if you can look at, as opposed to traffic volume, if you can look at the amount of content they're consuming per that visit, then whether it's a Tuesday afternoon where there's nothing going on or a Sunday afternoon where there's a ton going on, then we feel like we're able to measure that relative to the experience we're able to deliver. So I think there's a million examples like that, but I think there's a lot of vanity KPIs and metrics that you'll hear about, but I think if they're, to the point Kat was making earlier, if it's relative to what success metric you're trying to deliver, then you may have to get a little bit outside of the box.
Okay, so this is a good follow-up to that then. What data points or tools have been kind of tossed out of your standard processes? Like, what's a KPI or a metric that is now archaic in the marketing world, and why?
I don't know that any are completely gone, but I think some of the vanities have definitely been given a run for their money. I think walking in and talking about 100 million impressions and not having much behind that, I don't know. I wouldn't say nobody cares, because it's still a currency in the way that media is bought and sold, but you're not going to get anything done with that, right? So I don't know. To your point, depending on what your objective is what we're going to be looking at. So are you looking to bring new people in? Are you looking to drive awareness of your brand? Are you looking to drive irrational loyalty? If it's that, then I need to figure out how I'm giving you the most amazing experience. You spend, the $5,000, and you feel that you should because I've given you all of that value. So I would say that's what high level, nothing underneath, nothing about building that relationship and kind of continuing that engagement would be the things that we've now set more to the side because we actually have the capability to go in and talk about what did you expect to happen on Tuesday when you reached out to this set of fans and gave them whatever in value.
Yeah, and I would say the notion of there is a framework, right? A rigid framework of what you look like, what you look at. If anything, it is fluid. So much technology is coming online that if we say these are our canonical KPIs, in 6 months many of them will phase in, phase out. Like, remember when we all thought we were going to have to build, multi-year programs for Clubhouse? Like that, there's a lot of change in the market, and I think you have to make sure that you're measuring what you care about, and that it's not just measurement. Like if that doesn't turn into actionable change or a strategy that you're going to pursue, then it's an academic exercise.
How critical is it for your organizations to have state-of-the-art facilities like SoFi Stadium? Do you find your marketing departments pushing for upgrades or new facilities within your organization often?
That's not fair to the rest of us with Pat here.
I know.
Had to ask.
You do realize I played 10 games in that building, right? Until I'm fortunate to play in the postseason. So we're not there all the time. And so if you were to ask many of our teammates, we're about to embark on our interim practice facility, which will give us great opportunities to shoot more content. Right now, our business facility and our training facility are in 2 separate locations. So bringing that closer together where we're operating as one holistic team has so much upside from a storytelling, content, and just a better understanding of the pulse of the team and where their personal passions are. Because capitalizing on what they're passionate about and who they're already engaging with means that you're already just capturing organic slice of time.
Just to add from the women's sports perspective, there's one women's only women's specific soccer stadium right now in Kansas City. It was just built, just opened this year. So the rest of us are all tenants, and that's really challenging when you're building a brand and you're trying to create a great fan experience when it's not your home. So I think that pushes the marketer and me and our marketing team to think about how do you create that fan experience, especially when you're in the early days of building a brand. How do you build a brand both in a place that doesn't necessarily always feel like home, and then to what we've talked about before, outside of game day, and how do you again build that brand experience for people that may never walk into the door, and even if they do walk into the door, it doesn't necessarily feel like it's your stadium.
What are the intricacies with partnerships as it relates to growing your brand? How often are outside companies coming to you, and how often are you going to them for your own fan engagement efforts?
If you've ever watched any portion of a NASCAR race, you'll notice that sponsors are very front and center. So I think, and Dave Alpern from Joe Gibbs Racing was on a panel earlier talking about the identity of that sponsor becomes one and the same of the identity of the team, which I think is really unique, but it also brings some challenges that it's not okay for that brand to be visible. There's got to be meaning behind it. And I think if there's a goal of the team and the league, and then there are different goals for that sponsor or partner, it's not going to work. You've got to find the alignment, and it can't just be okay that the check is going to clear. It's got to be that there's aligned meaning and shared values.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think again with a marketing hat on, gone are the days of like, here's my brand's logo and it's prominent in the stadium and then we never talk to you again as a sponsor, right? The reason sponsors are at the table with a brand is because they are looking for that shared overlap of values, and on the sports side, it's our job to deliver on that. It's our job to articulate why you should be investing in our team versus your team versus your team versus any other cultural experience. So we absolutely need to come to the table and say, you know, these are our brand values. This is why it makes sense for you to partner with us. But equally listening to what are your brand values, what are your goals, and how do we build something together.
I mean, we spend 99% of our time there. That's what we're doing, is figuring out the right marriages. So we may have someone call us and say, you know what, I really want to get into X, Y, Z. And we'll say, okay, let us take a look for you. Let's figure it out. Does this make sense for your objectives, who your fan is, who your consumer is? Let's look at what they're trying to do. And we may have to go back and say, listen, like, I know you love this personally, but for your business and what you're trying to accomplish, we actually would say you probably should move over here. Or think about something else, or kind of a both and. So your point, doesn't always have to be one or the other. We spend a lot of time managing full portfolios of partnerships. You know, AT&T has over, I don't know, close to 100 partnerships that we're looking at, and they all serve very distinct purposes, right? And they mean very distinct things to whomever's business that's impacting, as well as to y'all, like from the rights holder side. So finding that marriage is so critical, and so you have to be the one who can be kind of the truth teller and let you know when you think it's going to work versus not, because nobody wants, you know, the check to just clear. We have to get something out of it, because that is what enables you to go and get more money from the other budgets. That's when you're like, this is working so well, I can now go get money from something else because I know it'll outperform whatever, I'm just going to call it, a traditional tactic might have been.
Yeah, I mean, our chief commercial officer says it best, which is, she says our remit within our partnerships groups is to partner with purpose. It has to make sense. And that's sometimes easier said than done. We talked, Kevin talked on his panel a little bit about what it means to develop a bespoke program for every brand that comes through, while I'm also trying to manage who we are as a brand and what that means to our fans with the backdrop of our partners. And I think that that's always a fun, you know, evolution. Every day is a different, I mean, you think the field, what happens on the field is live, hand-to-hand combat. So is the business office itself, because you want to make sure that the things that are important to your brand, you have a shared ethos about that. Otherwise, why is this the right marriage? Why are we, I mean, and Nalpern said it best when he was like, you guys have it where it's physically tied to the driver and the car and the opportunity. And I think we want to have that level of brand discipline so that our fans can continue to invest in what they thought they were investing in.
So partner with purpose. Fandom is not finite. Data is not meaningful without the insights and then the action to move forward. I mean, these are big ideas. I want, as our clock runs out here, I just want to say thank you to Kat and Carolyn and Tim and Shelley for your time this afternoon and your incredible brain power. We all appreciate it. Big round of applause for our panel.